From the right to the left, the debate over the Bush tax cuts, from the president who wants to find common ground to his liberal supporters who wish he'd stand his ground. Right now, the president meeting with Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi at the White House, presumably selling them on his tax cut compromise. I do want to bring in our Monday mega panel, John Alter, Newsweek national affairs correspondent and MSNBC political analyst, Jami Floyd, former Clinton policy advisor, and Dave Weigel, a political reporter at Slate and also an MSNBC contributor. Jami, what's at stake for the president right now?
Well, look, I think this battle was lost when the midterms went the way they went. I heard you tease this as the read my lips moment. I think every president has a read my lips moment. The president has to think about what he can accomplish in a lame duck session. You've got Republican Party on Capitol Hill that's sitting like this. Well, we won't talk about jobless benefits. We won't talk about don't ask, don't tell. We won't talk about START treaties until you give us what we want. And they didn't have the votes over the weekend. He knows it, and he's got to move forward. And that's what's at stake. All of those other things that this president could accomplish if he can make a deal on this at this moment.
You share that assessment, Dave?
Well, I think the battle was lost before that. I think it was lost in the campaign because this president didn't make an affirmative case for why government needed to intervene and why more than just these rich Americans that are pretty easy to attack because there aren't that many of them, why everyone might not get all the tax cuts that they want. I mean, this president thought Democrats could capture the tax cut argument, and so that gives him that. I think that is what placed him in this position before the election, after the election, of having to just argue that the best way out of this is to give Republicans what they want. The supply side argument is right. I mean, he ceded that a long time ago, so that's why you see this anger from Move On and the rest of them. There's no maneuverability to do what progressives want him to do, what they think will actually improve the economy.
He didn't make a concession to the supply side argument. The argument was lost when the economy didn't get better, because anybody who has ever studied economics, even freshman economics, knows it's generally not a good idea to raise taxes in the middle of a recession. So that's what he was up against, basically. Raise taxes on anybody. So even though the wealthy don't need this, they're not going to spend it quickly. It's not a productive tax cut for the economy. It's just very hard to raise taxes on anybody in the middle of a recession.
Would he be better served, going to the conversation I was just having with Joe Nocera, and they were talking about the Federal Reserve, about, again, whether it's money printing or tax cutting or stimulus spending, although stimulus spending is different, but again, tax cutting and money printing, if there's no incentive to invest or lend money in this country, whether it's extra money that I got because I got a tax cut or extra money that I got because the Federal Reserve printed the money, is not that the reason the economy hasn't recovered is because there has not been a resolution to the investment and business development and really job development systems in this country for years now. Am I wrong in that?
No, I mean, there's a lot of complex reasons, structural reasons why the economy hasn't recovered. So any
But doesn't my point? I guess my point is but let's accept that. I agree with that. There are complex structural reasons because the world has changed. That money is flying out of our country and into other countries, and American taxpayers are funding that flight. But let me finish my question. So if you look at that flight, did Obama lose this when he refused to engage the complex structural problems that are sucking money out of America?
I know you're going to be talking about economics with an expert later in the program who knows a whole lot more about economics than I do. But this is a president who has been in office for 2 years. You want to talk about whether the economy has improved. We voted for change, and then we didn't give change a chance.
Well, no, I disagree with that. We voted for change in the middle of the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression. Let me finish. And the president, instead of addressing the broken financial system, said, let's print some money and do health care. You could do that in 6 months. I refuse to buy the 2-year argument when the guy walks in with the biggest financial crisis since the Depression and instead of dealing with it, goes to health care.
I disagree. The stimulus.
How did he deal with it? They prevented the Depression, but he didn't create investment.
$1.4 trillion, $700 billion TARP program, and
but if the money is flying out of the country, Jonathan, if the banks are too big to fail and the money's flying out of the country, the easiest thing in the world to do is write $trillion checks with money you don't have against unborn children in this country to keep your job to suck the money out of the country.
They didn't deal with it.
No, they
dealt with it the way Franklin Roosevelt, more aggressively than Roosevelt.
I completely disagree with that. They
when
covered
you've got
it up.
A crisis, you've got to not to stop the boat from sinking.
I understand.
Or the Titanic from hitting the iceberg.
Right, absolutely. Why would you allow the shipbuilder then to continue to manufacture bigger Titanics for years afterwards? And so you're saying to me, oh my goodness, well, the Titanic, and I'm saying, well, yeah, you just drove the Titanic into an iceberg. You claim you covered it up because you printed a bunch of money, but now you got a Titanic factory over at J.P. Morgan. It's crazy.
And we disagree. We agree that we did not hit the iceberg.
I'm saying
we
there's
disagree
no jobs
about
in
what
America.
then should have been done after that.
Right,
short-term, long-term.
I'm saying there's no jobs in America today because this president allowed a financial system that's sucking the money out of this country to perpetuate itself, funded it with the unborn children's money of this country.
Right, and what I was asking is what is he asking for when he gives Republicans whatever they want on tax cuts? I mean, I bring up supply-side economics because the Republican argument has been that if we did nothing from January 2009 onward, if we just let banks collapse and if we cut taxes, the economy would have recovered. He's not asking for anything, and maybe he doesn't have the leverage to, but he's not asking for anything or asking to be heard out on the structural reforms you're talking about, on the credit problem, on these things.
I don't think he thinks we need structural reforms. I mean, you talk to the White House, and they'll tell you it's cyclical. They think we're just in a cyclical recovery. It's like, oh, it'll come back.
Dodd-Frank was nothing. It wasn't sufficient, but it was necessary.
But if the core issue is giant banks with no capital, which is too big to fail. And did Dodd-Frank deal with giant banks or lack of capital?
Look,
or did it deal with derivatives? In other words, Dodd-Frank can change 50 rules, but if the core issue is giant banks without money,
I'm not sure that is
we
the
have
core
bigger
issue.
Really? So you think giant banks with no money is okay?
No, I don't. But I think that in the interconnected economy we have, where long-term capital management several years ago, which was not a giant bank, could threaten to bring down the whole thing.
Right.
Everything is so interconnected that we unfortunately have to live with not just too big to fail.
So basically, we just all take our position as bank slaves and let
too medium to fail.
What's the difference between us and China? I mean, at this point, then you just defer all power, custody goes to the central government, and we don't deserve a banking system that doesn't harvest our money. Go ahead, Dave.
They have not yet decided how long to extend the Bush tax cuts. It could be a year, it could be 2 years. Of course, Republicans want a permanent extension. My hope is that it's a year or two, so that this is a major issue in the next campaign, in the next campaign cycle. I'm hopeful that this is an issue that Obama can campaign on, and then we'll see what the American people think of the Bush tax cut.
As long as there's recognition of what you were talking about, that the thing Republicans are saying about tax cuts is that they're the reason jobs are not being created in America, and the Democrats are not rebutting that and saying, no, the problem is business can't get capital. It's not gimmicks. It's not across-the-board tax cuts, because we had those tax rates for a long time, and they were not helping people who wanted to create jobs.
The Bush tax cuts allowed rich people to take money to Brazil, China, India. Listen, it's fantastic. If you are into getting rich, there's no better way to get rich than to get the government to give you some money, either through a tax break or through a bank subsidy. You get long Brazil, you get long China, you get long India, you get rich. It just is screwing over my own country in the process.
This is the critical point. If these tax cuts really were the key to job creation, we would have had terrific job creation in the last decade. Instead, we had the worst job creation in the last 10 years since the 1930s.
I know.
If the tax cuts were allowed to expire and we went back to the Clinton rates, in those years, in the Clinton years, under that tax structure, we had superb job creation.
But that was also before the financial system was renovated in '99. There's a lot of variables there. Let's go to WikiLeaks.
It's pretty similar.
Let's go to WikiLeaks.
Wiki, baby.
Dave Weigel, Julian Assange saying, "Listen, if you catch me, if you pin me in, if you take me out, whatever you want to try to do, I've got a thermonuclear device that is all of these documents unredacted, unedited, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." The State Department is saying one thing. The Columbia University is all in the news for banning their kids from talking about it and then retracting the ban. Where are we headed with this?
I don't think, if we've learned anything, I think if we learned we can't actually control this information once it's out there. Look at what Joe Lieberman's been doing in the last couple of weeks. Joe Lieberman, I guess he's not alone. A lot of people in the government have been asking websites to
remove Amazon
servers, domains to remove WikiLeaks information, and it spreads. There are people who are donating their server space to help WikiLeaks spread this. So it's actually kind of a problem for Assange. If he's threatening that he's going to release it all one day, we assume he's going to release all this one day. I mean, what he's been doing with this leak is just redacting it and trickling it because he wants more coverage. What he was doing in the past was just releasing everything and letting us deal with it. I mean, but that is
this is more
this.
production on his part because he's trying to create more of a presentation.
Well, he said in the past that he sees himself as a lightning rod for media coverage, and he's successful at that. You know, the information's out there. I think it's almost irrelevant how fast it comes out. It's actually better in many ways if it comes out in one big dump.
Yeah, look,
John,
this was a scummy thing for him to do. I'm not defending it. I was just traveling with Hillary Clinton last week in Central Asia. It's really hard for her to deal with that she has to apologize to all these foreign leaders. But having said that, the country will survive the exposure of these documents. They're mostly embarrassing. And they could contend, because we don't know what we don't know, it's possible that some of them could compromise some sources in those countries, which would be terrible, and it could even conceivably jeopardize their lives. But these are not top secret documents. This point has not been made very often. These are the level of secret and confidential. So it's not likely, based on what we've seen so far, that we should be comparing this to terrorism, say, or something that will truly destroy
an appropriate threshold.
It will be fascinating to see what happens if, and I would say when, Assange is apprehended. I mean, this is not a Pentagon's paper, and this is my legal assessment, but this is not a Pentagon's paper case. He's not a journalist, though he may fashion himself as one. He's not a U.S. citizen. He wraps himself in the First Amendment. I would say he doesn't enjoy First Amendment protection in the way that journalists would. And although news organizations have chosen to publish this information, he is not himself a member of one of these news organizations. This is a brave new world in the area of constitutional law and law in general. International law figures in. It's going to be fascinating. And as you say, you can't control the information. So it's an entirely new area of international law.
Is the classic source material of what is called espionage. That's what espionage over the last hundreds of years has been, getting diplomatic cables.
Fascinating.
A brave new world, to say the least, for everybody. Jamie, Jonathan, David, a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys.